When it comes to money and thinking about long-term investment, we often don't like to think about it. But investing in property can be one of the most safest and strongest forms of investment. And you know what? It stood the test of time. House prices on average have doubled every 10 years since the Doomsday Book in 1086. So investing in bricks and mortar can be the very thing that gives you the passive income and the wealth that you're looking for the future. If you don't know me, my name is Jason Davies. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and I help first-time investors or even experienced investors in getting their money to work hard for them and finding the best property investment deals in the UK. And in this video, I'm going to be covering the very basics of a buy-to-let, how to make your first steps into a buy-to-let investment. So let's get straight to it. I'm on a mission to help anyone out there who's maybe thinking about getting into the property world but not sure what the first step involves. Or maybe you've got a buy-to-let or a couple of buy-to-lets but you're not sure where to take it next. I can certainly relate. You know, I have a full-time job. We work hard every week waiting for that monthly paycheck to come in. We put some savings aside and then it sits in the bank and nothing happens to it. In fact, the value of that money actually depreciates over time. So I made my first step in investing in myself to learn about the world of property so that I can have my money working hard for me and not the other way around. And now I'm immersed in the property world and I help people make property investments on a daily basis. Let's get straight to it then. First of all, let's start with what is a buy-to-let. Now, we hear a lot of buzzwords in the world of property, but sometimes you need someone just to put it very simple in terms of what it is and how it works. Ultimately, a buy-to-let mortgage is when you're buying a property to rent it out and not to live in it, in its very simplest form. It is by far the most common type of property investment. Now, it might not be the most exciting, but actually it can be really, really rewarding and very simple to get into, especially if you're fairly new to the world of property. Now, the exciting thing is that there are three core ways in which an investor is going to be making money through a buy-to-let investment. The first one is rental income. And this is going to be great from a cash flow perspective, constant money coming in through the rents from the tenants in your investment. The second one is capital appreciation. This is really important one, this one, because ultimately you're going to be getting value out of that asset through time. Roughly and approximately, on average, property prices have doubled every 10 years since the Doomsday Book in 1086. So it's the one constant. Now, obviously that varies and it goes through peaks and troughs and it can vary by location. But as I said, in general, it always goes up. In fact, the last 10 years it's gone up by 40%, but if you look at over the last 20 years, it's actually gone up by 200% as an average across the UK. And the third way is rises in your rent, which outstrips inflation. And that's what's great, because obviously if it was in line with inflation, then typically you wouldn't be making any extra money out of it, but rental growth historically has always outperformed and outstripped inflation. And therefore that becomes another way of making continual money. Now, if you're new to this, you may be asking yourself, what is a buy-to-let mortgage? So ultimately, to get your head around this, there are two types of mortgages that are going to be relevant here. The first one is a repayment mortgage, and the next one is an interest-only mortgage. Now, the great thing about property investment is the word leverage, and that is building wealth through other people's money. When I talk about other people's money, I'm talking about a bank. Now, getting a mortgage is a good thing. Ultimately, a lot of people think, well, it's a debt. Remember, not all debt is bad. There is good debt and there is bad debt. And in the case of a mortgage, you can use that massively to support your wealth over time and bring in great cash flow from month to month. This way, you're turning that liability into an asset. Now, for a buy-to-let, ultimately, in most cases, you're going to be wanting an interest-only mortgage. And that mortgage is going to require what they call a 75% loan to value, LTV. Now what that ultimately means is the amount that the bank is going to give you compared to its value. So for example, just to make things simple, if you had £100,000 property, in that particular case you would have to pay £25,000 as a deposit of your own money, and then the bank would loan you the remaining 75%, £75,000. So why is it that we need to look at an interest-only mortgage? Well, if you live in your own house, you may have a mortgage for the house in which you live in, okay? And that's typically called a repayment mortgage. And the difference with that is that, of course, over time, you may have a 25 or 30-year mortgage, you're going to be paying the interest on that mortgage, and you're going to be paying the actual value and capital on that mortgage. Now, over the first 5 years of that mortgage, you're going to be typically paying quite a lot of interest against the high value in which you've bought or you've loaned from the bank. And then over time, as you go along nearer the end of the mortgage, you're going to be paying more of the actual value of the house and paying back the capital, ultimately to the point where you then own the house. With an interest-only mortgage, you're never going to be paying back the capital of the house itself. Okay, so at the end of the 25-year mortgage, or whatever it may be, if you owe £75,000, back to my original example, if that's what you've loaned from the bank of a 100k property, then you still owe £75,000 at the end of the mortgage. Now the reason that is great is because in the world of property investment, this will allow you to get, over time, this will allow you to get great rental yields and returns on your capital, have a great cash flow coming in, and of course, because property rises over time, all you need to do at the end of that mortgage is just keep refinancing it every 10 to 15 years and get great value from it, while still throughout that mortgage period getting some great cash flow through rental income and of course the rises in rent over time as well. Now, I want to take you through an example of a typical purchase, a real life example. Now, a savvy investor will understand that actually I need to factor in other costs. It's not just going to be the deposit itself. So what are those typical costs? Let's just take a £100,000 house, just for easy mathematics for a second. And again, back to what I was saying, we're going to be going for an interest-only mortgage. Okay, so you're only going to be paying down the interest, not the capital, from month to month, and a 75% loan to value. Remember, we want to be in a good position from a risk standpoint, so we definitely want to put in at least 25% as a deposit. So that's the first part of the cost, your deposit. The second one you're going to be looking at is solicitor costs. Now, solicitors are an essential process, and there's going to be a number of elements in there, legal requirements that you need to abide to. And of course, as part of the solicitor cost, there's going to be a number of other elements, such as searches, what we call disbursements, that you need to include. On average, you're looking at around about £1,000 to put aside for all those solicitor costs. Now, of course, that may vary. But on average, that's what it's roughly looking like. The next part is your mortgage broker. Again, another key essential cog in the process. And as I said, it's important that you put aside for a good mortgage broker around about £500, and that is again factored into the overall cost. And then the big one, and I'm sure you're all aware of it, is stamp duty. Now, even if this is your first home that you're purchasing, or first property you're purchasing, you still, because it's an investment, it's not something you're going to be living in, you still need to pay a minimum of 3% stamp duty. And that is something, again, you need to factor in. Now, because maybe, certainly if you as a first-time investor, some of the property prices are going to probably vary between 100 to 150,000. So if you're buying a £150,000 house, you're going to be at least paying 4,500 on your stamp duty. Again, a very important aspect to include in your overall cost before any offer is put in. And of course, stamp duty varies, and I think there's a separate video on that, but it's absolutely key and fundamental to include that in your calculations. So we've got a bit of an understanding in terms of the typical costs involved. And of course, there's more complex than that, but we can get into that into other videos. Another essential element to remember with a buy-to-let, and it's key if you're trying to learn the basics here, is what type of property. Now, of course, this depends ultimately on the location you're going for, and also maybe some of the experience you've got in investing, where you are in that journey. But certainly, if you're a first-time investor, I wouldn't recommend in going for anything too complex. I like things simple. I'm a massive fan of buy-to-let, and that's ultimately what I would be advising my investors, whether you're experienced or not. But of course, you can certainly look into the other ways, and there's so many other ways of making some great returns. If we look at flats, for example, that could be a great strategy, particularly if you're in a capital or a city area. For example, in London, that's going to be your main choice. But remember, for flats, it's very different. It's typically going to have what they call a leasehold, and making sure that the length of that leasehold is key. One, in terms of the success of you getting that mortgage, and also the value of the property. I wouldn't go for anything that's under 70 years in terms of lease length. It should be certainly above that, or 125 years typically. But I can cover that in a separate video. The second main type is maybe a detached house, and that can be great for things like flips and then refurbishments in the UK. But the main one, typically for people starting out, and a big and most popular type of investment, is your terrace and your semi-detached, where you can have maybe a young family or even students going into those places as tenants, and ultimately giving you great returns over time. The next key element to think about is the type of tenant. And as an investor, you want to be very clear on the type of tenant that you're looking for. Ultimately, there's three main types without getting too complicated. The first one is working tenants. The second type is what we call LHA tenants, local housing allowance, and then there's HMO tenants. Now, with the LHA type tenant, the local housing allowance, they will get a benefit from the government to help them, support them pay the rent, and this benefit is paid straight to the tenant and not the landlord, and therefore it's still the responsibility of the tenant to pay the landlord the monthly rental. And of course, if the rent is above the LHA benefit, then of course the tenant needs to make that gap. Ultimately, I believe the LHA tenants can be as good as working tenants. Ultimately it's about the person itself. We all have situations where maybe we get made redundant, or we don't have much cash flowing around, and we're in difficult situations. So I don't think it's any particular stereotype or avoidance of any particular type. It's understanding what's your strategy as an investor and what are you looking for. Of course, you've got working tenants, people maybe with young families that are in full-time or part-time employment. And then of course you've got HMO tenants. HMO stands for House of Multiple Occupancy. Now, for HMO, again, it probably deserves its own video. Well, I'd certainly do one on that one, but it's ultimately when you have 3 or 4 unrelated parties in the same property. So again, but ultimately it would depend on the strategy, and typically, in most cases, you would not be able to rent out a HMO with a buy-to-let mortgage. Another key element that all buy-to-let investors need to know is the cost of an agent. Of course, that buy-to-let that you have made an investment in will need maintaining, it will need everything like that throughout time. Now, typically, you can take an option on this, but really you're looking, as an investor, if you want to build a portfolio over time, you really need to look at the importance of your time and leverage your time through others. The one thing that's more important than money is time, because you can't get time back. It constantly depreciates, and there's nothing you can do about it. Money, you can make money, you can lose money, but your time is always moving, and so that is key for an investment. And money is speed, and so therefore really important to make that judgment in terms of what a letting agent can do for you. And also to factor in the cost. Now, I spoke about costs earlier on in the video. This is also a key cost, but I want to make it separate because I think it's really important, because in essence it's still optional, but a really important consideration. And you want to be taking at least 10% plus VAT out of your rent, your monthly rent that you're getting from the investment. That will be coming off, and therefore your ultimate return on capital needs to factor in that, so you know what the net capital that you're getting. The last point is location. Now you've probably heard the term location. It's very true. It's important not to make the typical mistake for particularly first-time buy-to-lets, or maybe this is a mistake you've made and now you're looking to rectify that. But buying a really low-value house, maybe £30,000 to £40,000. Now, if you live in London, the south like me, probably thinking I couldn't buy a shed for that. You know, it's no possible, but it is possible in the north, no doubt. And there's certain areas where you can get low prices. But you know, when I spoke about house prices always going up, it's not always the case for every single location. And so therefore it's really important to buy a house that's not that great, but in a great location, because then you can, of course, improve the house, refurbish the house, but you can't do much about the location. So you need to think about that, and I'll get that into more detail in later videos in terms of how you can really analyse an area, look at future developments, but you need to pick a great location, think about the future for the tenant, and that will continually grow over time. The last point on this one before I finish off the video is ultimately building a property portfolio, investing in property is a long-term strategy. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. I don't believe in most of them, or if any. Ultimately, you build your wealth through time, and property is a great and safe way to do that. So thanks very much, guys, for listening. I wanted to cover the basics, but of course, if you're more advanced, there's going to be more videos coming out, and I really want you to immerse yourself into these videos, get educated, invest in yourself, and by doing that, please subscribe and click the notification bell, like, and maybe even comment. Let me know whether you're in the property world or whether you're just starting out or you want to find more information, and there'll be different videos to watch, maybe more advanced videos in the future. Also, please do me a favour, let me know if you've got money now to invest and you want a quick chat. You can pop over to our Instagram or email us, and we can certainly help you start making those investments. Maybe you just pop it in the comment box below and let us know, and we can have a private chat and get started. Thanks very much, everybody. See you soon.